Michael Akey.
Al Cohen.
Glad to meet you, sir.
Glad to meet you.
Yeah, he spent 16 years with the State Guard. also.
Oh,
2 years before I went in the Army, and then when I got out, I didn't know they were in existence, and I saw an ad and an article in the paper, and I went down and signed up again.
well, we'll have to ask you about that, because we're always interested in hearing about Guard experience. A little bit straightening out here. It's a relatively painless process here. I'll ask you first of all where you were born, find out a little about where you grew up, then get into your military experience. You'll do most of the talking. I'll have an occasional question.
Okay.
Do you have any questions?
No?
Okay.
No.
A couple of notes here. Enjoying the summer?
Not really.
No.
It's too hot.
Well, up until the last few days, we've had it pretty lucky.
Yeah.
But you're right. I was down in New York City yesterday with my daughter. It was 96 down there. We're trying to find her an apartment. We've got to get her an apartment within 3 weeks. She's going to school. And,
Where's she going?
she's going to John Jay. And we looked at one place near the school, and I said, oh, studio apartments, have any? Yeah. How expensive? Let's see. With or without a balcony? Well, we'll go without a balcony. $2,200. I said, oh, okay, let's see. We got to rethink this whole thing. Oh,
My granddaughter went to
My
NYU,
granddaughter.
and she was so lucky to find an apartment.
Really?
She's off of 2nd Avenue there, and it's just,
okay.
she pays like $500.
Stab me in the heart.
I mean it, because
Well,
when
it
she
was
said she
under
was going to
rent
stay there,
control.
we were like, you know, the mother and father said, no way. She found a spot.
Well,
You know, it's like a little hole in the wall, but.
hey, it's their little hole in the wall,
She
and
loves it, she teaches there now, and she loves that apartment.
well, we're going to see. This is going to be an adventure. We talked to actually met the dean of students there the other day, and he suggested going over to New Jersey
It's a lot.
because it's actually, if let's see, Fort Lee is just on the other side of the George Washington, and you can get over to school, he said, a lot quicker than a lot of places within Manhattan. So, but she wants to live in New York.
Natural. Pleasure's all theirs.
Yeah, well, okay. Now, Wayne said you're under time restriction today. I just want to.
No.
No, I got a doctor's appointment at
At
4
4.
o'clock, but
Oh,
it's
okay.
just down here on
Okay,
off of Shaker Road, so
all right.
I'll probably have to sit there and wait an hour until he gets.
I know my
gets
wife
to me.
is she's a nurse in a doctor's office. I only go when I have to. You set, Wayne? All right, I'm going to do a quick announcement for the camera. We're interviewing Mr. Alvin M. Cohen at Latham headquarters. It's August 8th, 2001. Interviewer is Michael Akey, and the videographer is Wayne Clark. Mr. Cohen, where were you born?
I was born in Utica, New York.
Oh, really? I was born in Utica.
You were?
Yes, sir.
St. Luke's Hospital?
No, there was another one. There was another hospital there. Must be only 2 hospitals in
Yeah.
Utica, but small world.
Yeah.
Did you live in Utica for a while?
On and off, maybe for a couple of years. And then my father was transferred around, and we ended up settling in Albany.
Okay. You go to school in Albany, maybe?
Went to school in Albany, and I went to Albany Public Schools. I went to Hackett Junior High, and then Schuyler. And the war had started, and I left school. I figured I was going in service, so I went to work at the American Locomotive in Schenectady, and from there I was drafted.
Okay, you were drafted in
44.
44.
Mhm.
Where did you take your basic training?
I took my basic training at Camp Joseph T. Robinson, in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Well, let's see, you're a young Albanian and you're down in the middle of Arkansas. What was that like?
Hot.
Hot.
You think Albany is hot right now? That place was murder.
Mm-hmm.
And I got there in August, beginning of August, and it was very hot. And then as this August, September, it cooled off. And finally, when I left, it was December, and it was cold and damp.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we were out in the field, and we got a shipment of down sleeping bags out of the Schenectady Depot.
A little bit of
So
home.
it's like old Homewood.
Right.
Yeah.
What did you think of the South at that point?
We didn't like it.
No?
No. The people down there weren't too appreciative of servicemen.
Mm-hmm.
They liked to take your money, but that was as far as it went.
Mm-hmm. What did you think of basic training?
I didn't mind. I didn't mind it too much. Of course, I had almost 2 years with the State Guard.
Oh,
And I went to, in the summer, the 2 summers, I went to Peekskill
okay.
for 2 weeks.
So you
And-
joined the National Guard?
No, State,
New York,
New York State,
the New York Guard.
New York Guard.
Okay.
The National Guard was federalized,
Okay.
and some of the fellows from school were signing up because they got paid, I don't remember what it was,
Mhm.
maybe 75 cents a drill. And so I figured, oh, I'll go anyway, and I'll get some military training.
Sure. Where'd you do your drills?
New Scotland Avenue Armory.
Mhm.
When we first started out, they had just taken the cavalry unit out of there,
Mhm.
and the floor was just a dirt floor, and we used to drill in the dirt floor trying to march around and that. And then eventually they blacktopped it.
What was the New York Guard like at that point? Because they're just coming back into business.
Yeah. It's hard to describe because we never had any kind of military training.
Uh-huh.
And we had green one-piece uniforms, leggings, and the old World War I helmets. And we were drilling with shotguns. There were some rifles, shotguns, and Thompson submachine guns, Johnson submachine guns, and Risings.
Oh, really?
And Glamoration,
Okay.
which
And-
I believe are still stored down in Peekskill.
Well, there are some down there. Did you, you went down to Camp Smith
Camp
for your training. What was that like?
Oh, we ran field problems, and then there was KT,
Mm-hmm.
and we lived in squad tents. I think there was 10 men, 10 or 12 men to a tent. And the last time I was down there, it was a lot different. Air-conditioned barracks.
Was it a good group of guys you were with?
Yeah,
All local guys?
yeah, all fellows from the area. Some were fraternity brothers of mine.
Oh.
Fellows that we went to school with. One fella I just read a couple of months ago in the death notices. He stayed in the Marine, went in the Marine Corps and stayed there, and he retired as a chief warrant officer. And all of us, most of us, went into service from there.
So once you're in the service, you've already had some exposure to that, so it wasn't as difficult as it was for others.
No, it was easier for me than some of the others. When we first started out, as an example, the sergeant said they were going to show us how to pack a full field pack, the old style World War I, and that's what we had here in Albany. So he said, anybody know how to do it? And I said, yes. So I raised my hand, and he says, okay, let's see if you can do it. So I did it, and then they gave me acting corporal.
Oh, An
So
instant
I got out of KP that way.
That was a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
And after basic, where did you go?
After basic training, I came home for, I had, I think 7 days delay en route. Travel time was about 4 days. Well, I ended up with 4 days at home, and I had a report to Fort Meade, Maryland, and they went over our clothes, gave us shots. After about a day and a half, they loaded us on the train, and we went over to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, dropped our barracks bags in one of the empty buildings, and they marched us into a warehouse. They gave us a brand new M1, new trench shovel, new web equipment, and out the other door, back to the barracks. We cleaned our weapons. They fed us. We got on a train over to Jersey, crossed on a ferry boat, and up on the dock was a Queen Elizabeth.
Wow.
We were tied up to the dock, and that was the start of a 4-day trip.
What'd you think of the Queen Elizabeth?
You couldn't see much of it. There was about 27,000 troops
Really?
packed in that thing, and you couldn't move. And we were lucky. We had about 12 of us in a compartment, and all our names started with C. And luckily, we all stuck together right straight through till we were assigned to a company.
So what unit were you assigned to?
I was assigned to M Company, the 90th Infantry, M Company, 359th Infantry, and it was the 90th Infantry Division.
Did you have any idea where you were going?
No, well, we knew we were going to Europe.
Europe. And
when we got on.
landed in Scotland?
We landed in York, Scotland, and they took us off. The ship was too big to tie up to the dock, so they took us off on a lighter. We got on a train, and we started down towards London, and the transportation crew that was on there told us if you get stuck, if you don't cross the channel that night, and this was on a Friday, they'll give you a pass to London. And everybody's all excited, they're going to get a pass to London. So we got down to, we ended up at Plymouth, and we got right on the ship. And the next morning we were over in Le Havre.
So much for London.
So that was what I saw of London.
What did you think when you landed in Le Havre?
It was all new to us. Everything was pretty well beat up. And they start marching us up the hill to, I think they called it Camp Philip Morris, or one of those names after a cigarette. And as we're marching up, we see these little kids alongside the road looking for candy and cigarettes. We couldn't get over. They spoke French. You know, it was hard to visualize that we were in a different country and they're speaking French and they're not speaking our language.
Now, are you you're in an infantry squad? Rifleman is in an infantry squad?
When we got up to battalion, they needed volunteers for heavy weapons.
Okay.
And as I said, the 15 of us or so that were in the compartment, we were all together. So a couple of the fellows says, "Oh, we'll get in the mortar platoon." That was 81 millimeter mortars, and we'll be back of the line. So they started volunteering, and the rest of us, we knew each other, so we stuck together, so we all volunteered. We get up to the company, and as they assign us to a platoon, there was 3 men left out of a platoon of machine gunners. And the next morning, there was 1 man left. And he received it. He got a battlefield commission eventually. And that was the best thing we did, because out of the whole group of us. Some of us went back to the hospital, but we all came back.
Mhm.
And out of the 15 of us, only one fella got hurt bad enough to come back to the States.
Hmm. So you were in a heavy weapons
Heavy
platoon?
weapons. We ended up in a machine gun platoon.
Okay. What was your first combat mission?
Well, we'd be assigned to a rifle company,
Okay.
a squad of us. And actually, I don't remember too much about that.
Mhm.
They were moving us around a lot. We changed different sectors. That was just before we went into, through the Siegfried line.
Oh, okay.
And then we got through there, and through the Dragon's Teeth, there was a road and a bombed out farmhouse, and we had our squad in there. We had our machine guns set up in the outside, and it was pretty much a holding
Mhm.
position.
Now these, air-cooled 30s were you using?
Water-cooled.
Water-cooled 30s.
Water-cooled.
Okay. Were you a gunner?
I
assistant?
started out carrying ammunition, had 2 cans of ammunition, picked up a leather strap someplace,
Mhm.
and the strap went over my shoulders. I had 1 can on my chest and 1 on my back, beside my pack, and they took the M1 away from me, and I got a carbine. And eventually, I became second gunner, and I carried the water,
Mhm.
the water jacket, the receiver.
Mhm.
And we were lucky, though. We got through.
Mhm. That was a cold winter. What was it like? Were you generally in a fixed position, or?
It depends if we were assigned to a rifle company.
So you were moving around
We
a
were
fair amount?
moving around quite a bit,
Okay.
and our regiment was always stuck out in the woods someplace, so we didn't get to see anything of the cities or towns.
Mhm.
I was going to say something here, it slipped my mind. In fact, the end of this month, we get back to a reunion, and a division reunion,
Mhm.
and I see some of the fellows
Oh, that'd be
that
great.
were in their squad.
Well, that sounds like it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
Can you describe the Siegfried line? What the west wall? What did that kind of look like?
Rows of dragon's teeth.
Mhm.
It's like a pyramid that's
Mhm.
cut off on top without the point,
Mhm.
and there's rows of them. And in between the rows, they've had booby traps or mines, so to keep the tanks from going through.
Mhm.
And when we went through, we were lucky. The engineers had cleared a path.
Mhm.
There was no mines, and we got through there.
Were mines a big problem?
Yeah. And we got into, we were up in some woods, and there was a log dugout, about 6 or 7 feet tall, but it was sunk in the ground, just the roof was showing. And we open up the door, and it's covered with sawdust, just like someone took a rake and raked it out. Right in the center was a German helmet, so nobody would even walk in there. So the lieutenant went in with a rope, put it around it, and then dragged it out, and luckily it wasn't booby trapped or anything. But that's the problem we ran into.
Mhm.
And the Germans were pretty cute. They'd like to booby trap a toilet seat,
Mhm.
and, places they at least expect something.
Hmm. Now, did you come in as a replacement, or
I went in as a replacement.
What was it, the treatment like, being a replacement initially?
Well, as we all volunteered for the heavy weapons platoon. We ended up in this machine gun platoon. We very seldom saw the other platoon.
Okay.
We never saw the mortar platoon. Even if we went back for a rest, they'd have one platoon in one building, another platoon maybe 5 miles down the road, in another building. Most of them were all bombed out. So we never got to see them. In fact, the first reunion I went to, there wasn't anyone there that I knew, and they were all fellows out of our company, M Company, but they were either in a hospital or they were back someplace, and we never got to know each other. So the only ones we really knew were the fellows in our own group.
Right. Did you, were you kept in the line a fair amount of time, or the Army wasn't real good at rotating?
No,
No?
they weren't.
Was that a sore spot?
Well, they tell us we're going back, they're getting off the line for 3 days. So we go back to the town, miles back, and they tell us we're going to be here for 3 days. So the first thing you had to do, you had to clean crew-served weapons. Then you cleaned your own weapons, and if you had time, you try to get cleaned up. So usually you didn't have time to do the latter. So we'd be back for supposedly 3 days. Maybe 4 or 5 hours later, we're going back up. Somebody's in trouble, so we get back and have to relieve someone.
What were the feelings about the rear echelon people?
I don't think we ever gave it much thought, with the exception that they got the waterproof boots, and they got gloves, and they had underwear.
Little things like that.
Yeah. Our supply sergeant would bring up, it was about, we'd start getting a few more replacements, so about 20 of us. One field jacket, maybe a clean shirt, a set of underwear, and we draw straws for it. And the only thing we got a fair amount of were socks. Because the boots we had, the water went right through them. You had to carry an extra pair of socks right next to you.
Did you spend most of your time in foxholes, or were you in more fixed positions?
As time went on, we spent more time in buildings. We
Okay.
built buildings. Something.
Make life a little easier?
It did, even though they were bombed out and drafted, but at least it kept the wind off of you.
Did you have much contact with Germans as prisoners?
Not with prisoners, with the civilians we did.
Oh, what was that like?
If we get in a town, the standing order was, if you were going to spend the night in the town, you had to take the civilians and lock them in the cellar. Sometimes they'd give you a hard time about that. So all you had to tell them was that the Russians are coming. And they were very docile after that. They'd get down, we'd lock them in the cellar.
Interesting. How were your officers as a group, at company and platoon level?
Good, good. Nobody wanted, none of the non-coms wanted stripes, because as soon as you got stripes, you got hit.
Really?
And as I said, our platoon leader was a tech sergeant, and he made battlefield commission, and he was terrific. When he was with us, nothing could happen to him. In fact, at the reunions, I see my old company commander and our mess sergeant and our battalion commander retired recently, maybe 8 or 9 years ago,
Mhm.
as a major general. He stayed in.
Pretty good
And
gig.
He had the 1st Division in Vietnam for a while,
Uh-huh.
and there was one other, well, quite a few of them stayed in after the war.
Now, you became a radio operator?
After the war was over, I didn't have enough points. Most of the replacements didn't have enough points to come home. So they shipped the low point men to the 1st Division at Nuremburg. They were pulling guard at the war trials.
Oh.
So I started pulling guard at the war trials in the cell block. And then one morning, the first sergeant grabbed me. He says, "Do you know anything about a radio?" I said, "Yeah, I can turn it on and turn it off." I said, "That's it." He says, "Okay, see, get down to the MP station, which was adjoining the courthouse where the war trials were." So I went down there and I saw this lieutenant, and he says, "What do you know about a radio?" So I told him the same thing. So he says, "Good, you're on detached service. You'll pull 12 hours on, 24 off, and if you want to, you can stay back with your company, but just be here to go on duty." And that's what I did. So the time that I had off, I could do whatever I want, and I lived back with the fellas at the 1st Division.
Mm-hmm.
And when it was time to go on duty, I'd get on the radio and I'd call one of the Jeeps that was out on patrol to pick me up and take me to work. So that was a good deal, but it didn't work out because the MPs that were in town, the division MPs, weren't issuing enough citations for uniforms and being drunk and all that. So they brought in an MP unit, so that ended my job. Then I started pulling guard again in the cell block.
What was that like?
Miserable.
Really?
Yeah.
Why was that?
To stand in front of a door and look at Goering, or looking at Hess, or looking at Speer, von Schirach, any of those 22 war criminals, they're sleeping and you're standing there, and you have to watch them. And I don't know, it just, to me, it didn't set right.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it was better than pulling guard out in the cold. But
So you had to keep an eye on them constantly.
there were wooden, probably, I'd say it was oak. The doors were about that thick, and they cut squares in them. And there was a metal grating, and a light was hooked on it to shine into their cell. And you had to make sure that they slept with their hands out and their face exposed, and they didn't try and commit suicide. This was right after one of them hung himself. And I did that for a while, and then I got so-called promoted to an escort guard. I used to take them up to see their lawyers in the courthouse.
Any of them ever talk to you?
Von Schirach, he was head of the Hitler Youth, and Speer, they could speak very good English, and they would try and talk to us. We weren't supposed to, but we did. And they used to tell me, their parents used to bring them over to the Catskill Mountains in the summer. So I got a couple of their autographs, but you can't even, nobody wants them. I try to get rid of them, nobody wants them.
So you did get to
I got to
converse with...
talk to them, and one thing I did when I pull guard on some of these, on any of them, the first thing I would tell them, say to them, how do you like having a Jew guard you? Some of them, most of them, I think, understood English, but they wouldn't say a word.
What was going through your mind as you were doing that?
I couldn't wait to get home. I didn't want any part of it.
Did you have any dealings with the Russians there?
Once in a while, we lived on the outskirts of Nuremberg, a town called Firth, and when I had time off, I'd go into Nuremberg, which was like here in Albany, Delmar is to Albany, and I'd go in with the PX sergeant. He ran each company had their own beer joint, so he'd go in to get the beer ration, and I'd go in with him, and they had a bar set up in there, and the Russians in there, there was French, English, and everybody got along fine. No problem. But one thing I thought of when I was pulling guard in the prison, they used to rotate us. They had a stone wall around the courtyard where they used to exercise the prisoners. And every Monday, you could look down at the Palace of Justice, and in the basement there was a window. And every Monday morning, you'd see a 2.5-ton truck back up with crates of bottles, and it looked like water. It was vodka. And you could see that room was piled up high with cases of vodka. Next Monday morning, when they backed up another truck, it was empty. That's how they went through that stuff.
Like water.
Then one other thing I forgot. After pull guard on that, they wanted somebody had to be handcuffed to Hess when he was out in the courtyard with the other prisoners. So I was elected for that.
What was that like?
Wasn't too bad. I walked around a lot. Of course, he had arms that were twice as long as mine, so at first I was walking with one shoulder down, and then I got smart. I made him hold his arm up.
Do you speak English?
He didn't even speak to the other prisoners,
Really?
but you could tell by the expression in their eyes that they recognized each other.
Must have been a surreal experience at times.
At that time it wasn't, but when I look back and I see all these programs about the war trials and everything, then it's kind of glad I was there.
Did you meet any of the Allied prosecutors?
No.
No.
Although one of them was from, used to teach in Siena. I forgot what his name was.
Backing up a bit, did you, were you subject of any discrimination being Jewish, do you think, in the service?
In basic training, I had a run-in with one fellow, but after that,
That was in Arkansas.
that was in Arkansas.
You could have been a Yankee and that would...
He was from the north, so.
Oh.
And once overseas, we had made a river crossing, and we got a building to get in out of the cold to sleep in, and there wasn't any furniture in it. The building was in pretty good shape, so it wasn't bad. And they brought up copies of Stars and Stripes. We were sitting on the floor, and I got through cleaning my carbine. I put a clip in. As I'm doing that, this one fella came in a short time before as a replacement. He was off some farm up in northern New York, and he was looking at the paper, and he says, we're over here getting our rear end shot off. He says, and the Jews are back in the States making all the money. So I finished putting a clip in the carbine, and I put a round in the chamber, and put the safe on. I walked over and stood over him, and I said, "What did you say, Cohen?" He says, and he repeated it. And I said to him, I says, "You know, I'm Jewish." He said, "No, you're not." I said, "Well, what am I?" He says, "You're Italian." I says, "With a name like Cohen?" He says, "No, you're kidding." So I dropped the muzzle of the carbine right down on his chest. And I said to him, "If I ever hear you say anything about the Jews in front of me, or in back of me," I said, "I'll blow your goddamn head off." And the lieutenant sitting there never said a word. And after that, he wanted to be my buddy. He wouldn't have anything to do with me. But other than that, I had no problems. A lot of fellas had a lot worse.
When were you finally discharged?
July 3rd of 46.
You mentioned that you did see slave laborers of this in Germany.
Oh,
What was that?
yeah.
Was that like? Did you get into any of the camps?
No,
No.
no. A year ago, May, my wife and I and 25 people with their wives from the division, we went over and we saw Flossenburg. Our regiment liberated the Flossenburg camp, but we were out in the woods someplace, and I didn't get to see it, but we saw it a year and a half ago when we were there.
What did it feel like going back?
Brought back a lot of memories, especially we went up to a place called Habshide where we went through the Dragon's Teeth, and it brought back a lot of memories. Of course, I couldn't find the farmhouse that we slept in. That was long gone.
And what did you do? Where were you? Where did you get out of the service? Where were you discharged?
Fort Dix.
Fort Dix.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
You came back to the States. Was there anything you wanted to do that you hadn't done? And you want to go home?
Just get home.
Just get home.
Just get home.
It must have been good to see home.
And how?
And did you go back to work immediately, or did you go to school immediately?
No, I had some, I developed a skin problem on the way home, and that was troubling me, and I went back to my old job. I worked for a wholesale sporting goods store, and I went back to work there, and I stayed with them all those years.
That's great. Any final thoughts?
No?
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 Well, we thank you very much, Mr. Cohen.
Okay.
It was
Thank you.
a very good interview, and it's nice to meet a fellow Utican. Although I was just born there.